It's Wednesday night, and you know what that means. We're back live on the big mountain.
Hey, great to have you here on the mountain for another live episode. And Steve, we have a very important and special live episode. We're going to have our first live call in this evening. And you know what? We're going to start right with it. We don't want to waste time. We know we value his time to be on here. We really appreciate him being on here. I know he's, put some stuff out on X, letting people know that he's going to be on here. I think he has some things to say, but you are the one that made contacts with him. So I'm going to let you and our special guest, I'll let you introduce him, and we're going to go right into it. So here we go.
All right. So joining us live tonight, we have the world famous Mr. Genetics. If you follow Big Ten expansion, conference realignment, if you're on Twitter or X, you have to be following Genetics. If you're not, you go and follow him now at Genetics56 on Twitter X. So we're really happy to have him here. I have him here on the phone. So again, Mr. Genetics, thank you very much for joining us. And I just want to throw the floor out to you. Basically, we keep hearing all these rumors about Big Ten expansion. There's different things going on, and we wanted to bring you on here and help us kind of determine fact from fiction. So what are your thoughts on Big Ten expansion? What are you thinking we're going to see here, in the near future?
Yeah, so thank you both for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. And before we get into that, I'm just curious to see, are you guys familiar with the controversy of Patrick Mahomes, whether he's out of shape entering camp or not?
Oh, no, I haven't heard that one. That's spicy, salacious.
Yeah, he's got that dad bod that looks similar to Peyton Manning with a bit of a belly. And the shirt was showing a bit of a belly fat, and everybody's like, well, he's out of shape. Technically, without his shirt off, that's basically how he looks. He has baby fat on his little tummy still.
Right.
So
Doesn't surprise me.
I watched him on that quarterback show on Netflix last year, and his workout routine looks pretty intense. So I have a hard time believing he's out of shape.
Yeah. Nice. So I'm limited on time here this evening, guys, because I do have children at home that I have to get to bed at night for school, obviously. So I'll get into this. So I'm going to try to keep this relatively short and to the point. And to be upfront, there's not as much going on for expansion as a lot of people speculate on YouTube and X and elsewhere. Yes, there are things that are happening, but there's not much money that's currently available that allows mass movements where we're talking 10, 12, 16 universities moving to a new conference. The money's not there to allow that. So we're not going to have a Pac-12 conference basically ending its life. You're not going to see that for the ACC. Yes, the media executives view the ACC as a conference that will no longer be at value as it currently is. So it's going to be a watered down conference similar to the Big 12 when they lost all of their major universities. So we're talking Missouri, Nebraska, A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, and then all of the other schools that are lower media tier 1 value universities. That's what's going to be happening with the ACC. You're going to lose your Florida State. You're going to lose your Clemson. The UNC stuff's a little bit more complicated, and I'll eventually get to that down here. There's one thing that UNC is still dealing with from the past that people really don't talk about that is important to have people to understand. So to get into this, we may or may not have some news that could arise around that June 1st payment due date for the ACC, because the payment for the schools in the ACC, it's due by June 1st. So if the ACC does not pay Florida State, you're already going to know by default, because of that inaction, that Florida State and the ACC are very close to a settlement, and that will lead to an announcement sooner than later. I don't want to give any specific dates, but that's just one thing to keep an eye out for because that'll be pretty telling. But if the ACC does pay Florida State, that does not mean Florida State's not going to announce this summer. And I'll get into all of those various factual reasonings for that as I go on here. So for FSU, Clemson, UNC, there are the only schools that currently have the capability from a media value perspective in order to get pro rata, which means the ability to get paid the same amount of money as all of the current members do at a different conference. And the only school that really has a 100% chance at that really is just Florida State. Because UNC still has some other issues that they'll have to deal with in order to actually get a pro rata from the Southeastern Conference. Fox Sports has FSU and UNC currently approved for full shares. That was done several months ago. Clemson will not currently get pro rata. And because of the reasoning for that is because they value those 4 to 5 home games from a football perspective. There's not enough value in what is called media value exposure on a nationwide basis to currently give Clemson full pro rata like Florida State. Florida State has very good market penetration on a nationwide basis. Clemson, even though they get very good TV ratings, it's not as strong on a nationwide basis in all the various markets that are out there like Florida State is. In UNC, they have a very high media value exposure. They're number one in the ACC, but the problem with UNC is their TV media value is extremely low. So will ESPN be willing to pay more for UNC's football essentially to move them to the Southeastern Conference? Yes, I know the TV network can't technically move them. I'm just phrasing it in a way from a media perspective. Mm-hmm. So if the UNC goes from ACC to the SEC eventually, where is the value in their football program to get paid pro rata? Because you can't pay a UNC football the same as a Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Texas A&M, etc. Yes, Vanderbilt gets paid the same, but that's because they've been there for ages. If Vanderbilt, as an example, is being brought in now, there's no way that they would be paid pro rata. Mm-hmm. So before I go on, any questions at the moment?
So from your connections, is there? You talked about the SEC with North Carolina, and it sounds like that's probably if they were to move, that would be where they would go. But have you any knowledge of interest of the Big Ten looking at North Carolina at all?
There is interest there, and I'll get into that a little bit more here in a few minutes. It'll make more sense if I just wait to answer that as I go through this. But
no problem.
In short, yes, there's definitely interest from the Big Ten and UNC. But there's other universities that can bring additional value. So when you're talking Big Ten expansion, there's 3 criteria. And this is directly from Tony Petitti himself. It's not me just making something up. It's actually from him himself. It's football success. So how good are you at football? How good are your TV ratings? And do you have a halfway decent university academically? So the AAU is not a requirement. It never has been, and it's not going to be. So Tony Petitti is not going to prevent a football powerhouse like Florida State to not go into the Big Ten Conference just because they don't have AAU. Because what matters for an athletic department today is basically that house settlement that is occurring now. So you need more money coming in the specific areas that can be used to pay the players. Because you can't just use any dollar from anywhere in the athletic department to pay that $20 million revenue share. With the athletes, it has to go through specific revenue paths. So you're talking tickets, media rights, etc. So that is why Tony Petitti is really going to focus on how can I continue to grow those specific areas for my universities to allow them to have better predictability and better sustainability in their athletic departments. So that's why you're not going to see basketball additions with the Big Ten, because a basketball addition is not going to add the needed value to provide that predictability and sustainability for the Big Ten athletic departments. Because the money that has to go to that $20 million expense, that's a new expense, so money needs to be reallocated. So no university in the Big Ten is entering this new area with $20 million just sitting around it. Hey, we can just use this $20 million for that. We have it sitting right here. That's not the case. So they're going to have to reallocate things. So what percentage of our media rights revenue goes to A, B, and C, D, E, F, G, et cetera, et cetera. So they're currently building out models for all of that. So when you're talking Big Ten expansion, you're talking what kind of football powerhouses can we add to the Big Ten Conference that would increase those specific revenue pools? Well, it's Florida State and Clemson and not UNC. So that's where Clemson is starting to grow from an interest perspective within the Big Ten Conference. I know not many people out there are going to understand why, because they're not a very big academic school. Perception-wise, even though they actually are, they're a very good school. But I'll get into a little bit more of that here in a second. So the expectation is that Florida State will be the next member of the Big Ten Conference. So obviously that means Florida State has to take that up on their end. But from the Big Ten side, there's not a single athletic department employee. There's nobody at the Big Ten headquarters. There's nobody at the president's level that will say, no, we're not interested. That's absolutely not the case. Everybody's interested. Everybody wants to bring on Florida State. It's a new territory. Be able to travel down to the beautiful state of Florida. Nice weather down there. A lot of alumni. A lot of money that can be raised down there. So there's definitely no roadblock at all. Nowhere. So the Big Ten presidents have essentially unofficially already approved. So there's no roadblock that Florida State will be facing. The only thing that Florida State, or technically the Big Ten headquarters, has to deal with adding Florida State is just that academic perception, because they're not an AAU school. So they're just going to have to explain, why are you adding Florida State when they're not an AA school, when you haven't had anybody that's not an AAU school since Michigan State in the 1950s. That's very easy to do, so it's not even a concern. It's just something from a PR perspective that they'll just have to lay out. So
Makes sense.
So after Florida State would be added, the next plan is really just to take a deep breath. So Florida State's added as the 19th member of the Big Ten Conference. So then who's going to be number 20? So the Big Ten is not looking currently to go to 21, 22, 23, 24 members. The TV contract is currently not structured to go past 20 at the current time. They would have to find a new vendor in order to do that. But why would a new vendor come in and have to overpay for the games that they would have access to? Because any new game that is added to the pool of content that's available is going to go to the current network partners. So if Florida State goes to the Big Ten, you have a Florida State versus Ohio State game now that can be picked up. Well, that's going to either CBS, NBC, or Fox. That's not going to come from a new network partner. The new network partner would have access to an Indiana versus Maryland, a Rutgers versus Indiana type of game. So they would be paying $350 million per year for that game versus not having access to the new one. So the money, our return on investment is not there to go past 20 at the current time. So that's just something that people need to keep in mind. And the target list for specific universities that the Big Ten is interested in, obviously Notre Dame, But what the Southeastern Conference and the Big Ten are looking to do is just allow Notre Dame to exit the ACC if things imploded, got too bad. Just leave them, do it on their own timetable, exit from the ACC, create a scheduling agreement with the Big Ten and Southeastern Conference. So they're playing three games with the Big Ten, 3 games with the SEC. So you're creating balance in that scheduling agreement. So that's really what they're interested in doing. They're not looking to bring on or force Notre Dame into an action, because if you're going to force them into an action, they're going to rebel anyways. So that's just the way that's going to go. So there's nothing you can do about it. So the other targets besides Notre Dame is Clemson, North Carolina, Texas A&M, and UVA. So yes, I mentioned Texas A&M last summer, and yes, there is truth in A&M being interested in the Big Ten and vice versa. Is it anywhere close to the interest of Florida State with the Big Ten and vice versa? No, not even close, but it's still there. So when Florida State goes to the Big Ten Conference, yes, there's going to be outreach done between Texas A&M and the Big Ten Conference to see where the interest level actually is. Would you be interested in becoming the 20th member of the Big Ten Conference, essentially? If not, then you're going to move down a ladder to Clemson. And then after you get past Clemson, there's nothing left. From a media rights, that's tier 1 value. There's no tier 1 value on the table remaining after you get past Texas A&M, Notre Dame, and Clemson. So if you add a UVA, a UNC, you're not going to increase that ticket pool. You're not going to increase the media rights revenue pool. So you're not going to be able to create better stability and better predictability in the Big Ten athletic departments by adding a UNC or a UVA. That's why those two schools are on the lower end of that priority of who they would want to try to add as a 20th member. So any questions before I go on?
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I appreciate your context on the Texas A&M, because I keep hearing that pop up, but didn't really know where they fit in, so we appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. That was great.
Yeah, because if you ask anybody in Nebraska, or if you ask anybody in Penn State, and anybody at Ohio State or Michigan State, you're probably going to get completely different answers about Texas A&M. Who? Why? I never heard about it. Yes, I'm aware of that. You're gonna see that. But anyways, continuing on. So the finances, as I mentioned earlier, is already approved through Fox to add Florida State to the Big Ten Conference. So that's all in place. That was done months ago. And as it is today, there's currently no expectation for Florida State to go to the Southeastern Conference. That's because the Southeastern Conference still has UVA and UNC as their top choices to add to their conference. So we're not going to get into the reasonings why UVA and UNC for the Southeastern Conference. I'm just focusing on the Big Ten for this conversation. So I'll do that on X or something like that at a later day. So that's who the SEC wants to try to still add as UNC and UVA. So if they can get UNC away from NC State, obviously they will try to do that. UNC does not have control over their own fate, unfortunately, anymore because of the BOG and North Carolina took over. So they just have to get approval from the BOG president. Here are the financials. Yes, no. Okay, you can go free. You're ready. So then, and the reasoning, I'm going to get into this right now since I'm talking about UNC. But the issue with UNC is from that past lawsuit that they had to deal with, with the, if I can remember everything correctly, the academic fraud, I believe it was, something like that. I can't remember exactly what the exact words are.
Yeah.
And then that admissions issue that they had. So they had to spend 6 figures in that lawsuit. So there's a lot of PTSD issues that are still going on in the UNC environment because of that whole lawsuit that they had to deal with. So they do not want to take up another lawsuit currently at this time. they're just going to sit back as it is today, just sit back, let Florida State, Clemson do their things in the court, and then analyze things. So what does the environment look like? What's the situation look like? How did they get out? What did they have to spend dollar-wise to exit the ACC? So at that moment, they'll be able to determine what's their next action. So they're going to the Southeastern Conference if that option is still on the table. It's one of the worst kept secrets in athletics, unfortunately. So for the Fox Sports, they do not currently have Miami or Georgia Tech approved financially. So that is going to be a pretty tough road for those two universities to get into the Big Ten anytime soon. The money's just not there to add them. And the reasonings for that are already laid out, so you guys know now. All right, so for some more information, so the networks, so we're talking Fox, CBS, NBC. What they did is they mapped out, okay, who can we add to the Big Ten Conference that will allow us to get the best return out of our exclusivity OTAs. So the morning game, the afternoon game, and the night game. So obviously night game's NBC, CBS afternoon, and then that noon game for Fox. Mm-hmm. So if they added Florida State and Clemson to the Big Ten Conference, what their model showed is that they can create a week 1 through week 12 schedule that can create 4 million viewers or more for 3 games each week, all season long. So if they can get that accomplished, then the Big Ten's TV contract is only going to continue to increase in its value. So that's what they mapped out. So I don't know if anybody's ever mentioned that or not, but they mapped that out. So the reasoning why Clemson may not get their full share at the moment is basically their media value, exposure value is just a little bit too low on a nationwide basis for those 4 to 5 home games that they would be having in the Big Ten Conference if that's where they ended up. So for FSU and the Big Ten, the main thing is just being able to explain why are you adding them when they're not in the AAU, which I laid out earlier. Clemson, they're trying to become a national university from a prestige perspective, and what they're trying to do is create that more value. So one thing that they're trying to do is recruit heavier in the northeastern part of the country, and they're having good success doing that. Yeah. So they're trying to improve their footprint for regular student body recruitment. They're trying to get that increased value through their student body. So when they're graduating, I don't know how many students Clemson graduates on average per year or per semester, but if it's 5,000, 3,000, whatever that number is, well, if they go live in California, Washington, Oregon, Texas, wherever it may be, where you're then going to start seeing that the value grow on a nationwide basis. So that's where that value of growth that Clemson's trying to get accomplished. And eventually that'll bleed back into their Tier 1 value. So the next thing is for UNC, it's 8 figures, not 6 figures. Sorry, I misspoke earlier. When that whole lawsuit for academic scandals, and I remember now the SFF for the admissions. I remember that part now. So that is all I have for the UNC part of things. So now I just have a couple more items to go over. So we know Florida State will leave the ACC. So the question is going to be, okay, do they leave before the settlement is completed, or do they wait to announce that they're leaving after the settlement is completed? Well, it really comes down to what is Florida State willing to accept from a pro rata, so half shares versus full shares. If Florida State leaves before their settlement is completed, they're going to have to take half share, and then they'll just do an escalator until they have their full rights back. The reasoning for that is because of the value that Florida State adds to the road games as a Big Ten conference game is still higher than what the value is as an ACC member. So they're able to receive more money through that still. But if they can get full media rights, which is the expectation of what will happen before they actually start as a Big Ten member, well, then you're just going to do full shares and all of that. Then you don't have to worry about nothing. So really, if FSU exits the ACC and does not have their rights back, just as I mentioned, when they start as a Big Ten member, it's all about, do they have their rights? Do they not have their rights by the time they start as a member? And if they don't, half shares. If they do, full shares. That's how that's all going to work. And for the Stanford and Cal stuff that's out there, Cal and Stanford currently do not have approval from Fox Sports because Fox Sports does own the rights to the Big Ten Conference, so they have to get through Fox Sports first. So if the ACC runs into an issue where they lose a bunch of schools, Stanford Cal wants to try to get desperate to get into the Big Ten Conference at that moment. Well, right now they can't because there's nothing approved for them to get in there. So they need to work aggressively to figure out, okay, how can we increase our media value to get your approval, which I'm talking about Fox Sports, to get into the Big Ten Conference? Because Cal and Stanford, from a peer perspective, a voting perspective, they would get the votes to get in if they don't decrease the athletic department media rights value. Well, what they do, that's the problem. So they are currently not able to get approved. So that's the whole thing. So for them. So that's really all I had to say this evening is really just all of that, what I just laid out.
Well, we really appreciate it. We had some questions in the chat. There's one, I want to see if you want to take a shot at it. We had a listener ask what you think it's going to cost FSU to leave the ACC. I'm assuming with their rights. Do you want to take a shot at that, or are you just kind of going to let it play out?
That's why I noted the June 1st thing right off the bat. Because if Florida State does not get paid by the ACC, you're talking roughly $70 million in reduction of what the overall cost would be. So you take that $140 million, 130, 35, whatever the exact dollar amount is, then you subtract the 70. So basically, you're cutting that in half. So you'd go from $140 million to $75 million for the actual exit price, and then it comes down to the grant of rights. So if Florida State says we're gone, we're no longer an ACC member, we're out of the ESPN TV contract, well, ESPN no longer would receive any revenue from Florida State's home games. So at that point, what's the actual value in the media rights of Florida State to the ACC through the ESPN TV contract? Well, the value at the moment of notice is $0 because they're no longer part of the contract. There's no longer any revenue being produced. So then it comes down to a negotiation of, you are a member, X number of years, broadcasted all of these games. This is the money that you guys created. This is what you got paid, yada, yada, yada. I'm not going to get into all of that lawyerly crap. But it could go anywhere from $0 to $200 million. That's pretty much the range. You're not going to be seeing Florida State pay $500 million, $400 million, $350 million. So you're probably looking anywhere from $70 million to about probably $180 to $200 million to exit in total.
Makes a lot of sense.
Appreciate you putting that out there.
Yeah.
We always like to ask people their opinions on that, and appreciate you saying that.
Well, that's not my opinion. I'm not going to go into how that I got that information,
Okay.
but you know who I talked to, so you know.
Okay.
But that's not my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Gotcha. All right.
We appreciate you coming on, sharing some info. I know you're limited on time. We hit our half hour, which I know that's our agreed upon time. So we really appreciate it. There is some questions in the chat. If you have time, hang around the chat, or maybe even to come back to the chat later.
Let's do the question answer real quick here over the phone. Since
Okay.
I'm on the phone, I can just answer them real quick that way.
Okay, perfect. Let's see. Well, we covered the first one.
Yeah, I just want to comment on. It's not a question. I'll let you read some of the other ones.
Okay.
But the Clemson in the Northeast, we have Clemson fans on, and one is agreeing with that. Actually, we live in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
We're from Pennsylvania. My next door neighbor's going to Clemson.
Yes.
So Clemson, I got to say it right. Clemson. And yeah, that is 100% accurate that they are definitely, kind of driving up this way. And I have a question, if I may. So you mentioned kind of the top three for the Big Ten: FSU, Texas A&M, Clemson, and then SEC, UVA, and UNC. Without getting into the detail, do you think that was done together in like, well, if you get this, we'll get that type of thing, or do you really think that the Big Ten's top three truly are, outside of whatever the SEC wants to do, their top three truly are FSU, Texas A&M, and Clemson, and for the different reasons, the SECs are UVA and UNC? Or is there some sort of combining of thoughts there?
So UNC UVA basically is the SEC focal point. That's pretty much it.
Okay.
If they have to add Duke or NC State in order to nab UNC, that's a different conversation. We're not going to do that tonight, but
Yeah.
that is their focal point, is try to get those two universities. The Big Ten's all football focused. The SEC doesn't need football.
Gotcha. Okay.
Already strong enough.
One question here: any chance that FSU goes to the SEC, or do you think it's basically when they're able to pull the trigger on the ACC, it's almost a done deal to the Big?
Well, it's never a 0%, but as I mentioned, there's nothing indicating that would happen at the moment. There's nothing out there. Because I talked to, you know who I talked to? I talked to the people in the Big Ten athletic departments elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
I recently spoke to a P5 athletic director that moved to a new conference, and I asked him, I questioned, what were the reasonings for moving your university to that new conference? Well, two of the biggest reasonings were ticket revenue and the ability to not to devalue our media rights, because if they remained in the current conference that they were in, that erosion was already starting to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So they wanted to get out so they would get back into increasing their media rights revenue. Because media rights revenue is basically the number one most important thing inside of an athletic department, from what do we add to a new conference, from a football conference to another football conference.
Okay. I've got one last question for you, Mr. Genetics. Do you see, so as you've been on the Power 2 thing I've been following you for probably a year and a half, 2 years, at least 2 years probably. And you've been telling everybody Power 2 was coming. Power 2 was coming long before, the collapse of the pack and all that. What do you see as the role or between the Power 2 now? Do you see them as competitors, as adversaries, or as they kind of come together and break away a little bit financially, well, a lot financially? Do you see any avenues for cooperation where they could potentially form either a league or even have some kind of cooperation where they could kind of trade teams, a little bit of horse trading, work together on a media deal in the future? Do you see anything like that, or do you see them kind of staying as adversaries or competitors?
Partners is one good way of describing it. Because when I was meeting with that athletic department that works at a school that moved to a new conference, I can't say exactly what he told me because I'm not allowed to say in public. But the takeaway is the SEC and Big Ten want to do things together. So from a football perspective, how many things can they do together? Piece the dots together and you'll start to understand what's happening. I'm just not allowed to go into any of the details. But the P2, I don't know if they're going to eventually merge their TV contracts or not. There's a lot of discussion from the network side of things. They're interested in wanting to take a look at doing that because that will increase the total overall value. And then that means more competition between the two conferences, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, there's a lot of quote unquote partnership-based that growth that will come out of that. They're not competitors anymore. So that's just the unfortunate future of the way college athletics is shaping into now. Because all you have to do is go back to before the CFP contract negotiations started. So we still had the Pac-12 conference. We still had the ACC. We had our P5 together still. Yes, USC and UCLA left, but that damn idiot in the Pac-12 conference failed to get a TV deal in place, so that killed the conference. So if that idiot would have been able to get a TV contract in place that worked for all of their members, the CFP contract would not be a Big Ten and SEC controlled playoff. Because there would still have been enough value in the Pac-12 conference with Utah, Stanford, Oregon, and Washington still in that conference. So they would have been more even throughout that contract negotiation process. But because of that, and I warned people for a long time, if you do not want the P2 happening, you do not want to have the Pac-12 die. And the Pac-12 died. So that led into the CFP contract, now controlled by the Big Ten and SEC. They obviously are better conferences at football, so now they're going to get paid more via the CFP money. We all know the details of that. So that creates more gap in the media rights payouts for the Southeastern Conference schools and the Big Ten schools. You're talking $10 million on top of the gap that's already coming. So all of the projections that said $30 million, $40 million gaps are coming, $50 million gaps are coming, you're now starting to see that come into place. So that CFP contract just makes things worse for Florida State and Clemson to be an ACC member. ACC, why? What's the point of being an ACC member anymore when you're Florida State and Clemson? Clemson and Florida State, they're football schools. They're not basketball schools, no matter what anybody says. They're football schools. They want to compete for national titles. And what do you need in this new era of revenue sharing to compete for a national title in football? Well, you got to max out the capability of your payments to football players now, starting in 2025. So that's the answer. Long answer.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Okay, well, I think that's all we have for you. We really appreciate it. You told us you give us 30 minutes. You gave us 38 minutes, so we appreciate those 8 bonus minutes.
That's right.
You're always a great source. Everybody should be following you. If they're interested in college football, they better be following you on Twitter. We really appreciate your time.
Well, every time I do this, it always takes longer than what I have planned for and what I prepped for and what I tell people. Give me 5 minutes. It should only take 10 minutes to do this, and it takes 45 minutes. Happens every single time when I'm meeting with an athletic director for work-related purposes as well. It happens all the time. So just one last thing I have to say before we end this conversation here.
Yeah.
People need to understand there's 2 different things happening in the Florida State lawsuit. I'm not going to talk about Clemson's lawsuit here. So when you're talking Florida State lawsuit, you have your grant of rights, you have what is it going to cost to get the hell out of here. So the grant of rights can be repurchased. So the grant of rights is actually independent of the actual war in this lawsuit. The war is the cost. The grant of rights, they'll get that back. They can just buy it. So I just want to make sure people understood that, because a lot of people are like, well, how are they going to be able to get their rights back? Well, how are they going to be able to join a conference if they don't have their rights? Well, if they announce they're leaving, they can just buy their rights at whatever the cost will be that the ACC will agree to and Florida State's willing to pay for. Well, that issue is then solved. Yeah. But what's the actual total cost between the exit fee plus the GR to get out? So that's really what it all comes down to.
Yep.
Makes perfect sense.
Yep.
So
well, we thank you very, very much for coming on the Big Mountain.
Yep. So don't be surprised if you hear stuff this summer. Don't be surprised, please. That's all I'm saying.
Okay. You heard it here first, everybody. Do not be surprised.
I'm excited. I think that means we might have a fun summer. More episodes, more content to talk about.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, so thank you all for your time today. I'm going to hang up here and get the kids to bed, because I always got to tell them it's bedtime. Get your butt upstairs. Your tubes is turned off. Upstairs, bedtime. And then once they're in bed, I'll go back down and I'll just log on and see if you guys are still going.
Sounds good.
We're all dads here, so we understand and we appreciate your time.
Yep. All righty. Have
All
a
right.
good night, guys.
You too.
Take care.
All right,
Good night. All right, that was pretty cool.
That was fantastic.
Yep.
I mean, you're hearing it from the translator of the horse.
Yeah.
I was gonna say the horse's mouth, but he's kind of the intermediary
mouthpiece,
between the
kind of,
mouthpiece.
yes.
Yeah. So it's funny because I was writing some stuff down as he's talking, and I was getting some questions ready. And as he kept going, he just kept answering my questions because I was going to bring up Miami and Georgia Tech, and I was going to bring up, well, what about this and what about that? And he just laid it out so perfectly. I'm like, well, I don't have many questions anymore. But I did want to go back, as I had mentioned. I wanted to go back to especially the Texas A&M because we've done a lot of hypotheticals and we've had some fun with this. We've also done, our college football 2030 episodes. We've tried to do much more realistically in terms of what's going to happen. So very interesting that he says, FSU, no surprise, FSU has a home.
Yep.
You have been saying this. We have been saying this for months now. And I know Genetics is probably saying that much longer than we have. But FSU has a home in the Big Ten. It's absolutely likely that's where they're going to end up. The realignment whisperer. Thank you, Squeeze Money. You put the words in my mouth. I usually need that because words don't come to me very easily. But the Texas A&M being kind of the number 2 there from what he said. Very interesting, and getting into Texas because that's always been in the back of the mind.
That'd be massive.
We've done some of these kind of fun. We did the mock draft of this and all that, and I've always been kind of thinking about, wow, A&M, would love A&M, says David Jurgensen. That's almost a game changer. I mean, both of those, you're getting into the state of Florida and you're getting into the state of Texas. Look out. That's amazing. And then, Clemson, he's putting right up there as the next, I hate to say the next best. I know we have Clemson fans on, but, he ranked them kind of
running
third.
a strong third.
And then UVA and UNC, and I think we kind of knew, especially UVA, was that second tier down, not 100% sure with UNC, but you've been very consistent with the SEC. I know we're not an SEC podcast, but you've been very consistent with the SEC, trying to get into Virginia, North Carolina. You've been saying that all along, too.
As the Big Ten's trying to move down the I-95 corridor, it seems like the SEC is also trying to move up into the Northeast a little bit.
Yep. So, Zeiler says Texas A&M was a surprise. To me, that was probably the beefiest part. I mean, he said a lot of good stuff. Don't get me wrong. But putting him, ranking them where he did there was kind of the first I've heard of that to that level. That level of, hey, they're kind of the number 2 right behind that 20th team, as he said. And he also confirmed what you've been saying. Probably not looking to go any further than 20
for now.
There's
not enough money.
Not enough money, and that's what's driving the boat here with all of this. I'm just looking over anything else that came to your mind. I want to look over my notes here real quick.
I don't really think there's anything else from him. I mean, just a great presentation. There's some folks. Genetics can be kind of polarizing. There's people that absolutely love him, follow every word, and there's some people who, they say, oh, he's a jerk, he's whatever. I mean, he has a no nonsense manner. He's a guy. He likes to deal in the facts. He likes to deal in the numbers. And he just doesn't always have time for BS kind of thing. So he comes across a little brusque on Twitter. I get it. What I'd really like to do, JY, there was some other. Can we scroll back up in the chat? There was some Big Ten expansion.
Let me go up to the very beginning. Give us a minute, everybody. I know. First of all, Steven's on. He asked if it's beer. It's apple juice.
Yeah, apple juice.
No, it's my good. It's Cape May Brewery. Some of my favorite brew. We got that college football guy on. Good to have you here again. And we got Bo Weevil, who's a Clemson fan and was watching. So sorry, we'll keep going down here.
I'd like to start there. So Bo Weevil and Clemson fans, Clemson. If we talked about this on another episode, but if you would have asked me 9 months ago, I would have said there's no way Clemson's ever going to end up in the Big Ten. If they leave, they're going to the SEC. But I brought this up a few times. There's these little rumblings, these undertones. Clemson kind of keeps popping up, and especially now as they've gone through their lawsuits. You kind of think that would Clemson go this far and do the lawsuit if they didn't think there was a possibility of getting in the Big Ten? So I really think that that's an interesting possibility. David Jorgensen asked me, being a Penn State guy, how bummed would you be if Florida State and North Carolina ended up in the SEC? Well, first of all, I think Florida State. I really think they're going to end up in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Genetics seems to think the same way. So yeah, I think I would be bummed. I mean, first of all, I would love to just go back to a Power Five. Have more regional conferences or whatever. But if we're going to align, for me, Florida State makes that great sense in the Big Ten. I actually grew up. Florida State was kind of my second favorite team when I was younger.
Yeah.
I kind of drifted away from that, but I'd love to see them. And UNC, I think UNC would be fantastic in the Big Ten. They'd be a great partner down the road. It's just so hard to see what ends up with them. And I don't see the Big Ten wanting to take UNC and NC State as a package deal.
Yeah.
I don't see that ever happening. And I see maybe that would be more likely in the SEC. So it is. I'd be more bummed. Florida State to me is the prize.
Yeah.
And you get somebody to be the 20th. UNC, the brand would be awesome in the Big Ten, but if they don't end up with it, I don't think it's the end of the world.
The brand would be awesome, but he said, you look at their top three: football, football, media, and academics. UNC doesn't really hit 1 and 2 there. They just don't.
He did mention they do have some media value, even though they're TV ratings. They do have some media, but they're not just at that. They're not at the level of a Florida State, a Texas A&M, or
exactly.
even Clemson.
They're not a tier 1,
right?
And if you can get 2 of your 3 tier 1s, they're not. They're just not there.
They're probably at the top of that next tier from what he described.
Exactly. Yeah.
So Stephen Vite, he asked about Miami, Florida. Genetics. I don't know if he covered Miami at all on here, but he's covered them before, and he said that they're just not a tier 1. They don't have good TV ratings. They don't have as good of a value. Miami, I see Miami as kind of an add-on team that come along. If Florida State gets and they want a 20th, maybe they bring Miami along. But honestly, I could see a scenario with Miami where they get left out of the Power 2, and if they don't want to be in the ACC anymore, they may have to look at the Big 12. I mean, they could be a good addition to the Big 12.
Yep.
All right, so
I think it's Stephen Vitt.
Vitt, okay.
But Vite, what is that?
A little fancier.
Yeah, it's fancier. I'm pretty sure it's Vitt. That's
or
right.
Vite, yeah.
Yeah.
So Joey, our Buckeye fan, Big Ten, the best conference in all of sports. I totally agree. We already addressed the FSU to the ACC. Which I really thought I liked getting those numbers from him, especially with his contacts and people that he talks to. I thought that was great, and I agree. New to this says Gators don't want FSU in their backyard. There's not a lot of value added for the SEC to add Florida State. They already have these strong football teams. They're already in the state of Florida. So I don't see that. And I thought that was an interesting question about ESPN and Fox, and then the SEC and the Big Ten.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought it's kind of been trending this way, but Genetics basically confirmed they're more partners now than adversaries.
Right.
Which I thought was really interesting with his point about Notre Dame. And I told you I'd heard at one point that was looking like maybe Notre Dame was an option, but then once they got their TV contract in place, that they were set for a while. But one thing I keep hearing from I have some contacts within the Penn State program, is that the Big Ten has tried to do some kind of a scheduling agreement with Notre Dame, and I kept hearing that pop up, and then Genetics tonight says the future might be where they have a scheduling agreement with both the SEC and the Big Ten. They can kind of be that.
And I mean, when he said that, I went, "That's a win-win-win."
Yeah.
It makes total sense for all parties. And as he said, if you push Notre Dame too hard,
yes, they're going to go the other way.
Yeah, screw you.
Yeah.
We don't need this crap. We're high and mighty, and we don't need to deal with it. And that was Richard Schuster that mentioned or that brought up just the ESPN Fox horse trading thing that you kind of had asked as well. We appreciate the thanks from Kendrick and Chad. And let's see, I think we're getting down to most of them here.
I want to address, they talked about the Big Ten and SEC dropping the bottom teams.
Yes, Zeiler brought that up.
Yeah, so, and Genetics has covered this on Twitter before. I've shared my opinions. I don't think we see anybody dropping out anytime soon. This is more about consolidation. I think the people that are in, they're in. Now, way down the road, if they were to form some kind of a super league, whatever, but as long as you still have a Big Ten playing football and an SEC playing football, I think Northwestern, Rutgers, Vanderbilt, they're safe. They're already in. They got their lucky, was the Willy Wonka golden tickets, many years ago, and they're just lucky.
Yeah, so we're getting down to the more new ones here. So Kendrick asked, wait a minute, let me see. T-Mac, what's he say? The SEC would cut the Big Ten's nuts off if they tried to steal Texas A&M. Get real.
Well, here's the thing about Texas A&M. Texas A&M was incredibly salty about Texas
Yes.
joining the SEC.
Sure.
They tried to fight it. And they have that little brother complex, okay? And honestly, the bigger prize in the state of Texas is Texas.
For sure.
But Texas A&M is still a big prize. So the SEC, they've got Texas.
Yep.
You know, A&M, I don't know. I don't know if they would fight that much, you know, because they got their big prize.
Sure.
So,
Yeah. And then are we going to repost this? Yes, we probably will. Usually our live episodes we just let as live episodes. But I think this one we're going to pump back out, especially since we had genetics.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got to make sure we get views on this sucker. I know he's been putting it on X, but a lot of good stuff here. So yes, Kendrick will likely repost this as a standalone episode. Jurgensen asks, and he's been on here for several weeks. For my fantastic,
He's our
love
Husker
having you
fan.
on here, David.
Big Red.
He says, if you could pick 2 out of 3, who would it be between Florida State and the top 3 that he gave? Florida State, Texas A&M, or Clemson?
I think it's obvious if you could get Florida State and A&M get into Florida and Texas, like
Yeah.
you mentioned,
Right.
you know, but I still think Clemson would be a good pairing as well. But I
Right.
mean, if you could pick to get into Florida and Texas,
Silly. I agree. I would go Florida and Texas. But there's absolutely nothing wrong to our Tiger fans. Absolutely nothing wrong with you. We don't mean to leave you out. But I'll tell you, you get in the state of Texas, it's a game changer. If you've seen any of our episodes, you know how we talk about some of the states and how you want to be in those. So, Zyla, happy I caught a live show. We're happy that you caught a live show, too. We'd like to have some fun. That college football guy down here in the SEC, they don't want NC State either. They didn't bring enough value. That makes sense. Miami to the Big 12, I've seen that a couple times.
I want to address that college football guy,
Okay.
North Carolina State. Here's the thing, and you know, genetics talked about this. There's so much going on, and I agree with you. The thing is, North Carolina State doesn't bring a lot of value to either.
Yeah.
Of the Pac-2 most likely, or the Power 2 most likely. But I do think with all the complications going on, I think that the Board of Governors, what they're doing, there is some risk. They're trying to protect the ACC. They're trying to protect these North Carolina schools, keep them together. And, you know, maybe it's possible that they could keep them together, but it's also possible that, you know, they could hurt UNC to help NC State, and it might not end up helping NC State at all. So it's like, you know, cutting off the limb of one of your kids to help the other one, and you know, do you really want to do that? So I think there's some risk there involved, and we'll see what happens with North Carolina State. Although I will say, I keep hearing that the SEC wants to be in the state of North Carolina and the state of Virginia for TV and marketing reasons.
Well,
So,
there you go. UNC UVA. That's exactly what apparently genetics is hearing as well. Some Big 12 talk for Miami and NC State. And then now we're down to the beginning. What we got? If A&M FSU join big, Clemson is going to the SEC with UVA. JC Films, that seems to make sense to me. You know, of those 3, I would think Clemson is the one, regardless of whether or not they won in North Carolina or Virginia. I would think you would want Clemson in your conference. That would be me. Just I don't have any intel like genetics has, but I would agree with you, JC Films, 100% there. So
someone mentioned they were saying, why would the SEC want to let like the Big Ten down into the state of Florida? Well, the SEC, they have the crown jewel in the state of Florida, which is Florida. I mean, that is, it's the Florida Gators. They've got everything they need.
Sure.
It doesn't really. I don't think it hurts them for the Big Ten to go down there, and like a couple people have mentioned, they're kind of acting more as partners now. So
Sure,
anything, if you can bring more value into the Power 2, especially if they start to work together even more, I don't think too many people are going to fight that too much.
that makes sense. If you view them as partners, the fact that one has Florida and one has Florida State makes complete sense. The one has Texas, the one that has Texas A&M, and they're not adversaries. Remember what genetics said
Yes.
towards the end there. They're not adversaries here, and I know we like to think of them as it's much more fun to be like, they both want to be the big dog here. Maybe they're happy being the 2 alpha males,
Yes.
and they control the destiny of everyone.
Yeah.
And I also really appreciated his comments towards the end where he just like, hey, the Pack screwed this all up, and it wasn't just the Pack. And he didn't name him. We all
Commissioner K.
We all know who he was talking about.
Yeah.
But so you know, just it was great. Everything about everything he did there. Like I said, I was writing down questions, and I'm like, why am I writing this down?
He's just addressing it.
He's
He's
just
doing
talking
it.
about it anyway.
He said he had a PowerPoint basically that he was going through.